And this Q&A series is a great way to learn from these farmers and find out what their tried and tested methods are for enhancing and including nature on their land. Over the next hour, I will kickstart the event by asking the speaker a few questions, and then I encourage any of you that have any questions to write them into your chat box, which is on your banner, either at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, and ask any questions to the speaker in relation to their farming practices or methods around farming for nature. If you miss any of the previous sessions or any of the ones to come, they'll all be up on the YouTube channel, our YouTube channel in due course, including this one if you have to leave early. So on to tonight's event. We're delighted to have Farming for Nature Ambassador Fergal Anderson join us. Fergal is one half of a farming team, so he works alongside his partner Emanuela, and they run a 30-acre leaf and root farm near to Loughrea in East Galway. Fergal, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. Perfect, thank you. Fergal, I watched your video again today, and it really struck me. So for those of you who haven't seen Fergal's video, it's up on our YouTube channel. It's just 5 minutes. It's a really nice overview of his farm and his farming practices. But Fergal, what really struck me was what a complete ecosystem you have. So you might just paint the picture for us of your farm for those of us who haven't visited.
Yeah, I think the key maybe to what we have going on is in the woodland to a great extent, because it surrounds a little bit the two fields that we work in. So there's only one side of those fields which doesn't have sort of trees and mature trees around it, and in that woodland is it's about 30 years old, and it was planted by my folks 30 years ago. But it has a lot of different types. So when they did the plan for the planting of that, it wasn't just like a monoculture spruce or whatever. It was there was an organization called Cron, I think, who were involved in that, Joe Garwin, back in the day, and they really looked at the land quite carefully at the different kind of, the wet areas where they put a lot of alder down, at the kind of, they put some areas of oak and Scots pine in. They did a lot of ash, which unfortunately now is the dieback. So it was just an interesting species selection. There's a lot of different species in there, and there's some ornamentals in there, and there is an area of spruce as well at the back. But I think having that kind of around the farm, around the two fields where we operate, is a great bonus, just in terms of there's an awful lot of wildlife and living in there and kind of coming in and out of there and onto the farm. And I suppose we've also planted a huge amount of fruit trees and fruit bushes and things like that. And so I suppose what that ends up with is a kind of very, and every year I see it change, but I see the sort of ground change a little bit, certainly around where the fruit bushes and fruit trees are. They're kind of, I suppose they're trying to integrate a little bit the soils. I'm hoping are kind of becoming a bit of a synergy, building a bit of synergy between those areas, and it becomes kind of a continuous place that we can harvest things from, hopefully try and make a livelihood from, but also becomes a home for lots of different species. And look, it's an encouragement, that woodland. It needs a lot of work, and it's something that we hope in the next 10 years to get into there and really begin to thin it out and see what else we can do with that woodland. But I think it's thanks to that woodland really it's given the place its special characteristics, and maybe I suppose we're lucky that my parents had the foresight to put those trees down and to kind of think a bit as well about the kind of trees that they put down at the time. Makes a big difference now.
Yeah, it sounds like it's got such nice diversity, but it's also growing and changing and evolving as you go. So what's your own journey into agriculture and this farm?
Well, they planted up 25 acres, and there was always two fields left over. The hump field, which we called the hump field, because it has two kind of humps in it, and the other one was the meadow, and it was always just a meadow, which I remember hay being cut on even when I was a kid, and helping with the mini mellows, going around collecting the square bales and stacking them and stuff like that. But I never considered really the farming as an option for most of my, I suppose, early life, and it was when I was in my mid, I don't know what age would I have been, 2006, 2005, 2006, yeah, that's what's that. I'm trying to remember, 14 years ago. I did this master's in Galway in public advocacy and activism, which is all about kind of human rights law and media, and I suppose how the media shapes our view on things a little bit, and it was very interesting. But as part of that, we did a work experience, and And I suppose at the time I was looking for solutions to the problem of global capitalism and the impact it was having on the planet. And I was thinking about what can we do, or what kind of life am I going to have? What kind of livelihood can I have? I don't know, because genuinely, I thought, do I work in an NGO? Do I work, where can I find something that kind of fits with, I suppose, a little bit of political ideal that I feel comfortable with? And part of the, we did work experience as part of the masters, and myself and a friend of mine were looking at what was happening. There was this G8 meeting, which is, I don't know if you remember, the group of 8 was like a group of big countries, the UK, the US, France, they used to meet like G7, G8. And they had this G8 meeting in Germany. And the German, there's a big mobilization against it, because people were saying, like, this isn't fair, this is ridiculous, you're all meeting, talking to each other, it's not a kind of unilateral, it's not a multilateral space, this is like it was a protest, I suppose, it was a big protest. And one of the organizations that was attending that protest was this farmers organization called La Via Campesina. And so we emailed them and said, is there any way we can help out? And we got an email back from them saying, we don't normally answer these emails, but actually, yes, we need help with translation. And I speak Spanish and French, and my friend is Italian and he speaks Spanish as well. So we had a few languages that we could kind of help out with. And they said, we don't normally do this, but like, if you're willing to come along, come along. And we went to this place, which is Rostock in North Germany, Eastern Germany, on the Baltic Sea. And the German activists had built 3 camps of more than 10,000 people per camp. Now that's an incredible feat of logistics, which really, I still haven't yet to see the like of that today. But they built these camps for activists to come from all over Europe who were going to try and protest against the G8, and there was big mobilizations and demonstrations planned. And it was a very exciting place to be. It felt like, okay, we're actually here together doing something. And what happened when I met the farmers was monumentous to me, because I realized that also attending this big mobilization against the G8 were lots of big NGOs, lots of environmental organizations, but they were all staying in the in hotels in the city center. And all the farmers that came with the Via Campesina were sleeping with us in tents in the big field with the German activists. And I met farmers from Bangladesh, from Turkey, from the Basque Country, from, where are they from? From France, from all over the world, from Southeast Asia. And they traveled there with this kind of very common message of talking about food sovereignty, talking about the kind of the rights of people to live in dignity on the land, to kind of, trying to counteract this agribusiness control of our food systems. And it blew my mind. And to be quite honest, I sort of said, look, here are people which have huge amount of integrity, and they're here on the ground, and they're just, they don't have any airs or graces about what they're doing. They're just genuine people. And that started kind of my work with the Via Campesina, and I ended up working with them in their Brussels office for 3 years. And funny enough, the woman that I replaced left the job to start a farm in France and Brittany. And eventually I followed the same path. I left in 2011 to come back here, to come back to Ireland, and said, look, we need these 2 empty fields. And to be honest, the most shocked people were my parents, who were just going, what are you doing? Because here you are, you've got a job. It's in Brussels. And they were like, this is perfect. You're great. You found your, and we were like, no, we're leaving the jobs, and we're coming home. I was 30, and they really had no idea what I was doing, I think. And it was only after a few years that it began to dawn, and now they're super supportive. And it's not that they weren't supportive, but I think they were just a bit going like, and I have friends that have told me since, they've said, I thought that was crazy. I didn't think you'd keep on doing it. I thought you'd give up. And I was quite shocked, actually. I was kind of offended by that. But it was, it's funny that was how I ended up farming. And as I said, I have no regrets about that at all. But it was also, meeting La Via Campesina was a real eye-opener for me. And meeting those farmers was an eye-opener. And every farmer that I met in that organization from every corner of the world had the same integrity, the same clarity of message. And I realized that those farmers are here in Ireland as well. And we're meeting them with Farming for Nature. We're meeting them with Tullip Bio. And it gives me great hope, because I actually think that is the biggest thing you can do to change the planet right now is to get land if you can, and do something positive with it. And I think that's a great gift it'll be a gift for yourself and for future generations,
Cool. Talking of land, what's your farm like what's your actual, how's your farm, how does it work? Like,
Yeah,
if
so
you were
it's
to
set up.
say season by season, what's your farm look like?
Yeah, okay. So we've got the 2 fields. We didn't have a huge amount of space. So we started off small, and we built it up slowly. So like from, we started off, we were always interested in selling to local markets, direct into local markets or wherever we could. So we started off just selling in Loughrea market, and we set up in quite a small area. We had 1 polytunnel. We cleared a bit of land, and like we built it up year on year. We planted more, we opened up more ground, we put up more other tunnels. So like now we have 3, not massive tunnels, but 3 polytunnels outside for growing like tomatoes, peppers, etc. We've got a small potting tunnel, really too small for our purposes, but we make do. And then we've got the field areas outside. And I suppose one of the big changes that came at the start when we started farming, we had a neighbour that used to come in and do a bit of plough and do a bit of rotavating. And then I started borrowing my neighbour's tractor. Another neighbour, it was a Massey 35, which was a great tractor, but we got a bit of machinery, we got a rotavator, and we were able to do a bit of work ourselves. And then eventually we bought a tractor ourselves a couple of years ago, and that's sort of give us a little bit more autonomy as well, just in terms of like having a machine for moving stuff around, a transport box, a rotavator. So we have the tools are important. Like, so we have a rotavator, a flail mower, a ridger, which is kind of like ridges 2. So it's not like the 3-furrow ridger, it's a twin ridger like that, and a roller. And basically we do everything on a kind of permanent bed. So I ridge the beds every year. And we grow green manures in between every crop, and we have a rotation, 2 fields in 2 rotations of 3, and so every summer we're growing one of those rotation areas in a green manure. And we've experimented a lot with different types of green manure, but we're probably just going to settle on buckwheat and phacelia because it's the easiest, and it's also not that big a problem if it goes to seed and self seeds and stuff. It's not a very invasive. So like that itself is a great habitat, and I see a lot of life coming into that every year. Those small areas, even if they're not very big. I mean, our bees love the phacelia, and like I've seen a lot of animals running through that. And the flail mower is vital in that system because it allows you to shred up the green manures when they're finished, when you want to bring them back, put them back in the ground, and it allows you to sort of terminate any crops that you're finished harvesting, or so we leave a lot of crops in the field and use the flail mower to shred them up and rotovate them back in, which means less labor for us. And I suppose the farm for us has always been about balancing labor input as well as output. And so, like, I mean, there's lots of ways of skinning the cat, if you excuse my expression. I can't think of another word. But lots of ways of doing small scale horticulture. And I suppose what we found is in terms of the amount of labor that we have to put in, which is very little, it's myself and my partner, we've needed to use some sort of mechanization, and the system works for us. I mean, the soils are responding well. It's very light ground. It's very kind of hungry ground, I would say, as in like it's and so we're trying to reduce the amount of tillage we do. Like, obviously, we're not pulverizing the place, but we do need to integrate the green manures somehow. And so we're looking at different ways of doing that. But so at the moment we're adding a lot of manures and a lot of we try and add manure like once every 3 years if we can. To an area, but we might have to do that a little bit more often now. But look, it's I mean we start all the plants in trays, transplant everything. We don't direct sow really anything. We've stopped growing some crops that are too labor intensive, or which the soil didn't seem to like. I mean, carrots, celeriac, we just sort of gave up on them, even though celeriac, I mean, we had a good market for it, but it was just a pain to grow, and it, very hungry, and just never seemed to really get very big. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's answering the question or not.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important. No matter where you are, you get to know your soil, and you get to know what's the best thing to do for it. Do you know what I mean? And where you're going to get the best rewards without putting in high inputs or anything. Tell me, are you organic?
No, we were.
Just really quickly, Fergal, I'm going to just say very quickly, we're going to turn off our videos because I think the internet is going a bit off. So if we just turn off our videos and carry on talking.
Sure.
Yeah.
We were certified organic briefly for about 2 years. And there's a long story in that as well. When we tried to enter into the organic scheme, and we weren't allowed in because the area was too small, because we put down this mixed cropping on our BPS form. This is all getting a bit technical, but anyway, we stopped it. We weren't getting the payment we were going to get out of it. We would just about have covered the cost of certification, and we don't really need it because we're not selling into any outlets which are reselling. So like everything we sell is now going to restaurants, or else we're selling boxes directly to people. So it wasn't an issue. And to be honest, it was a lot of kind of more paperwork that we just didn't. We already feel like we're under a bit of pressure, having to deal with things like so. Yeah,
but you're presumably, obviously you have a trust system with your customers, so I assume you're chemical free. As
oh no, absolutely, yeah. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, yeah, we practice. We always say we use agroecological production methods, and like obviously we still use all organic inputs. You know what I mean? The only thing I think we don't use, which is organic, was a spent mushroom compost, and that was just because I got a few loads of it in, and it turned out I wasn't allowed to use it, but I mean I used it anyway because it's just very hard. We're down a very narrow lane, and it's hard to get people who bring stuff to you. And to be honest, getting organic spent mushroom compost seemed like a bit of a stretch out here in East Galway.
One of the questions I received before your talk is, how do you correct your soil fertility? So that's why I was just asking about it. For people who are chemical free, do you use compost? You mentioned green manures, obviously. Do you use compost quite a lot, obviously, for your?
Yeah, I mean, like it's something we're exploring ourselves, because I mean, I think it takes a long time to work out the answer to that question. And like, I mean, obviously we've added manure, like it was in from my neighbours. I have a friend up the road who is a sheep farmer, and he's given me a lot of manure from his sheds. We've added any manure we can get really from local farmers that give us. We bought in compost on a few occasions. We bought on some compost from Donegal, this EnviroGrind, which was quite good, but it was very expensive. As you said, we used a lot of green manure. When we did our soil tests at the start, the main deficiency was potassium, which is quite common, I think, around this part of the country. And so we added potash just that we got from Fruit Hill Farm. I can't remember. It was a granular kind of potash. I mean, it's something we have to keep an eye on. And like, I mean, we do soil tests. We should do them more regularly, but we try and do them every year. And I suppose what we're looking at now, what I'm interested in now, is trying to see how we can maybe create more of a synergy between the woodland and the horticulture, and see if there's some way that we can kind of begin to compost some of the wood chip or cuttings from like young branches, what they call it. There's a name for it, but to try to see if we can create some sort of synergy there, and sort of draw some of the fertility from the woodland space as well. But I mean, it is an issue. You kind of have to constantly be on top of that, particularly when you're working the ground quite hard, which, I mean, if we're asking it to produce multiple crops or whatever, but I think it's gotten better. We've watched the soil improve. The fertility is better than it was when we started. So I mean, that's good for me. Like, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Sorry, Leonie Baldwin has just answered for you. It's brashing.
Brashes, isn't that what you take off the trees? Yeah, I think there's a name for that. It's the first year's growth, basically, and there's a lot of people in France using it. It's like the first year's growth of deciduous trees, 1-year-old growth. You can use that, I think, to make compost and stuff. But I see there's another question there. What tractor do we have used?
Yeah,
I have it's a Renault 7212. It's called. It used to be a vineyard tractor, but I got him to open up the wheels a bit wider. The guy that bought it off. It's about 65-70 horsepower tractor, but the Massey Ferguson was a great tractor too. It's the same kind of size as Massey Ferguson, basically. I suppose what the important thing there. The only thing it doesn't have, which I wish I had, was a front loader, which is, for anyone considering buying a tractor, a front loader I think is a very useful tool. Because I can't turn big heavy compost heaps, and you end up breaking manure forks trying to load up transport boxes
and your back.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no fun in that. So those kind of things are important. Like, and I mean, one thing we used to do more, and I suppose we haven't in the last 2 years, is organize mehels on the farm, and like, do work days or work weekends. And that's one thing that was very successful. We'll certainly go back to that. I mean, people really were happy to have the chance to come out and help, and they were happy to get out and weed, and they're happy to get out and shovel manure for the day. Especially if you have a bit of food and a bit of a fire at the end of the day and stuff like that. Like, it's a great day out, like, for people. It's
quite. I've seen it elsewhere, like say down in Moy Hill and stuff. With another Fergal.
Yes.
Yeah, that seems to be quite a successful system for them. You mentioned in the video, anyway, you mentioned you use a no dig system. What does this mean for those of us who may?
Yeah, so there's an area, like, and again, I mean, like, farming it seems to be a constant process of learning, and that you could have done something differently. And we always say our motto is fail again, fail better, but it is still our motto, probably always will be. But there was an area that we wanted to introduce a kind of permanent beds, and so we ended up I've actually built raised beds from timber. Now, I still think it might, a lot of people are doing this now just with wood chipping the paths and mounding compost up. That's the normal system now that a lot of like the intensive horticulture people will be practicing. But this system is essentially the same. You have a raised bed made out of timber. We just add layers of compost on the top, and like what we've learned that the best things for us to grow in there are things that you remove the entire plant when you're finished. So things like turnips or what else do we have in there at the moment? Yeah, things that I suppose, ideally you don't have to do a huge amount of work pulling out all the stuff that you're finished with. But we have a little rotation going in those raised beds at the moment as well. We have actually peas and beans that grow in them, turnips. And when I say turnips, I'm not talking about the big Swedes. I'm talking about little white turnips, like the more kind of salad turnip, you really call them. Garlic is in that rotation, and I think we actually grow spinach over there as well.
Okay. So you mentioned before you have quite a lot of routes to market. What are they, and how are they beneficial?
They've narrowed hugely in the last few years.
Of course, with COVID.
Well, yeah, and even before that, actually, we went all in with the restaurants just before COVID started. So I see Kathy has asked that question there. It's a very pertinent one. So I suppose the year before COVID, we decided that we would stop doing the boxes and really push the restaurant more. And so we had a look at our prices, and we had a good talk to the chefs. I suppose in terms of developing the relationship with the restaurants, we were lucky at the start because we were friends with Enda, who opened a new restaurant, and he opened a high-end restaurant, and he very much wanted to support local producers, Enda McAvoy. But I think those chefs are out there. Really, the chefs need to understand also how food production works, and you have a bit of a job to do in explaining stuff to them, and it takes time. And I think you build that relationship over time. You want to try and convince them to take as much from you as you can and to work with it, and that's a challenge. With Enda, that wasn't a difficulty. He wanted that challenge and was willing to kind of adapt and change according to what was available. And like almost as a matter of principle, like he would use everything that we threw at him. But I think that's just about building it's a personal relationship. It obviously there's business involved there too, but we never let that get in the way of the fact that that we both appreciate what each other does. And I think that we kind of, he's supporting the farm, and I think the farm is also kind of supporting the restaurant with ingredients that you can't really get. You can't get the kind of stuff that we produce, I suppose, or that we're getting from local suppliers through the industrial supply chains. It's not the same. And so I think it's important, for people to recognize that a little bit, and you got to work in that relationship. And COVID obviously threw a big spanner in the works, so we went back to doing boxes for people in the local area during the lockdown last summer. And I suppose we had other stuff going on during the lockdown. I was building a house and things like that as well. So it wasn't as urgent, or I was busy with other things anyway. So we knew that we were going to take not a step back, but a little bit of a slowdown on the farm anyway. And I think that's one other thing that I would say you can kind of, turn up and turn down the production a little bit according to what's going on in your life, and you have to kind of recognize that too. When we had a daughter a few years ago, that changed the dynamic of the labor again on the farm, and so like we kind of have to adapt. We've constantly been adapting, but we were just talking about it yesterday. We were saying maybe we should go back to doing the boxes. It's really what we wanted to do, and it all comes down to time and labor, and like they're the key things for us now, and it's something we want to resolve and look at and begin to think about how we can either get people involved in either employee or else interns or woofers or some sort of help, just because it doesn't get any easier either.
Yeah, and I think I was actually going to lead on to that next question, because you mentioned you have a bit more kind of tractors and stuff, but that's in lieu of maybe labor, whereas a lot of other horticultural farmers I've spoken to would rely heavily on woofers and stuff, which then comes with its own problems, that you kind of have to provide the work, if you have employees. I know woofers are slightly different, but I suppose that kind of leads, is there more resilience I mean, there's cost benefits to each. You know, you can either be more resilient by not having employees because you're relying on just you and Emanuela, but then there's obviously there's a lot of cost to that as well, in the sense that it's hard work, especially if one, you know, you have to get distracted by other things. But
I think it's the key to the whole local food chain is ultimately comes back to labor, because I mean a lot of it is relatively labor intensive, certainly vegetable and fruit production in particular. We put out a lot of fruit as well, and you know, there's years where if we were picking it, like if we were out there picking it, we'd probably be able to sell it, but like you still have to spend hours out there picking it, you know what I mean? So all those things, all those things I suppose are factors. And I think there's different probably answers depending on the scale that you're at and depending on what the capacities are. We've got quite a small farm, so this is one thing that we have to look at is like, imagine if we did pay somebody, would we be able to scale production up enough that we'd be able to pay them and have something for ourselves? Because to be honest, I mean, that's ultimately what you're trying to do. I mean, I suppose an important thing to say is that like there are no supports, there are no, we don't get any farm payment at all. So that there's nothing coming in terms of like, there's no reps or gloss or there's no direct payment, there's zero. And I think that's a bit of... Is
that because it's horticulture, or is that because it's a small farm?
Well, we're not in the system. I mean, like, I'm sure if we'd been in the system maybe 30 years ago, maybe my parents don't get a payment on the woodland either. So like, I mean, the horticulture is part of it. Like, I suppose the scale is part of it, but none of the payment schemes are set up really to provide us with that, if that makes sense. I mean, you'd be trying to squeeze into some box which isn't really designed for it. And like, I mean, even eco scheme payments are all on like BPS, and like the BPS area is very low because like, I mean, there's so much woodland around our farm that, you know, if they try and break down how much actual utilizable agricultural land there is, and it's very, very small. So like, I mean, yeah, I think it's more practical. We just don't really fit into any of the existing boxes. So I mean, that's why we're involved with Tullip Bio, is to try and create some new boxes, particularly for local food production, because I think it's where we could see the quickest response. I mean, if we really created an enabling environment for it, I think you'd have a huge amount of people that would be interested in getting involved in doing it, as in like getting access to land and doing the work.
Yeah, can you just explain for people what Tullip Bio is if they don't know?
So yeah, Tullip Bio is a new organization that we set up, which is a farmer-led organization working for, I suppose, a change in the food system to one based on agroecology, food sovereignty, and on, you know, policies that benefit the land, people, and communities. So that's the short, the long and the short of it. So I don't know, but we have, you can look at our website or join us. It's tullipbio.ie, and we have a local food policy document which we worked on a bit, so that it looks at some of the issues that are involved in local food production, and one of them is labor. One of them is incomes. One of them is finance, for example, which is very difficult to access. And so there's various things like that. So
yeah, because I think it would be useful for people, because I know I received another question before we went on air online. Sorry, the question was, how did you start? Where did you start, basically? You know, with what, and what problems did you face in your first years?
Well, we had a little bit of money saved from our jobs, actual real jobs. So we spent all that pretty quickly on putting a road into the field. This is how we started. Put a road into the field, there was no road. We brought a mobile home into the field. We bought a garden shed. We bought a polytunnel. We got the field plowed up. That's how we started. We bought some tools and we just started seeds. And we started. And look, we were. I mean, I look back and I sort of say we were just very driven and really wanted it to make it work, and like and so like the two of us sort of went at it very hard at the start, and like, I mean, you need to have that energy. I think if you're starting something new, you need to really want to do it. Like, and it was the first thing my neighbor said to me over the wall when we arrived back and I explained our plans, and he's a small farm here. He's a carpenter actually, but they have some cattle and he just said, you have to love it. And I was going, what do you mean? He goes, oh, you have to love it. Like, and I said, okay. And I suppose I still think about that. And he was right. It was the first thing he said. You do have to love it. If you don't love it, you probably shouldn't start doing it, because it's going to test you in many ways. But yeah.
Yeah, I can understand, and there's probably quite a lot of naysayers if you actually listen to them as well, you know. But you know,
yeah, I mean, there are not. There's a lot of people who are really supportive too. So I suppose it works both ways. I mean, that's life, I suppose, isn't it? You got to listen. I mean, you can't spend too long listening to people that are. There's always going to be some people that try and, like, you know, tell you it's rubbish what you're doing. Other people think it's great, and neither of them are right. Probably somewhere in between. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that, I mean, you've been working your farm for 10 years ago now. 10 years now. What's the biggest success you've seen?
Is this the biggest
You've
success?
had, or biggest success for nature, considering the focus that we're.
I guess, I mean, watching, I suppose, and that's not, again, it's not all to do with our farm. The biggest success for me, actually, in terms of nature, is actually the change in my literacy about nature. So, like, you look at, when I first moved back, I didn't really know the names of all the plants or the birds, or I didn't know all those things. And, like, as you learn those things, you actually look at the land differently, and it changes you forever. It can be hard as well, because you look at some land and you go, God, that looks really empty. And I suppose, I don't know what you'd call that. Like, is it like ecological literacy is a kind of fancy way of saying it? Maybe like a beginning to, see.
Get to know your land, yeah.
Well, and not just your own land, and maybe just, get to know plants and where they grow and why they grow there, and animals and where they live and why they live there, and birds and things, and those things. Spending time out in the field, you eventually pick them up, and I think it's that's the biggest change, and for me, that's obviously in some ways the biggest achievement for me so far, is that I've been able to see things slightly differently because of that. Maybe, I mean, obviously, I'm happy with the way the farm has developed. There's always things that you do differently. There's some things I think we've done well, and we're always trying to do things better. Like, and I suppose, we're trying to find out ways of managing the land in a beneficial way, and it's not always easy, because it's not always easy to know what is beneficial or what's not beneficial, and sometimes you're best just leaving it alone until you think you can do something constructive. So yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of admiration as well for horticulturists, because you're going from seed to plate, more or less, well, to customer, so there's so many avenues that you kind of nearly have to be good, whether it's marketing, people, growing, looking after it. So there's a lot of kind of strings to your bow that you have to develop and foster as well. Fergal, what are the biggest things you've done for nature on your land? I mean, I know in the video you talk about laying hedges and pollinator strips. Maybe there's some things here you can describe what you've done for nature on the land.
Yeah, I suppose we've tried to do that. That's worked very well. I mean, so in those rotations that we have on the ground, we try and put like strips of green manure in between. And I think that's been good in terms of breaks up like I would say the monotony of crops or whatever that you might have, like, so you between each sort of set of crops, you've got some beds of either phacelia or buckwheat or something like that. I don't know. I mean, to be honest, it's difficult to measure, because I mean, there was a beautiful wildflower meadow here before we started, right? And I sometimes feel a little bit of guilt that we plowed it up or dug it up or like have changed it. We've changed it probably permanently nearly now, because we've planted so many trees and fruit bushes and all that in there. But I think, like, what I suppose the change is hard to measure. You can see obviously like insect life and newts and like other bird species and nests and different things, and like we my dad got us one of those cameras, the nighttime cameras there, like for my birthday last year, and so we put that up, and like we weren't sure what we'd see, but like we saw foxes and badgers and couple of cats, our own cats a few times, and birds and different things. And so it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot going on out there that we might, like I said, once you get the literacy, you can see it more clearly. And I don't know what we've done. I suppose time will tell. It could be another 20 years maybe before you'll see a real. We'd like to see a forest garden here of some sort, like alongside veg production, and something mixed into the woodland that has it uses the woodland. I was saying to my dad, like, if we can get that synergy going between the woodland and the horticulture, it's a little island like of 30 acres, and it looks very small when you zoom out in Google Maps. It's not very big, the area of land that we have, but like I think you can do an awful lot in a small area, and like I would hope that it doesn't need to be a haven for wildlife, because I would hope that there'd be plenty of spaces around it where the wildlife can also go. But if it's a place where some things can exist in some sort of peace, that's good for me.
And on that, do you find you have had the opportunity to speak to your neighbours about their
Yeah.
farming methods and.
Oh yeah, I mean, like,
or
I
are
don't
people
think-
interested, or more to the point, of people leaning over your fence asking you?
Well, they're looking at, like, I mean, look, I suppose the main difference when I talked to some of the neighbours and told them we were going to be growing vegetables, I mean, the classic way of growing vegetables, you grow a field of cabbages or a field of carrots, and it looks very different when you come here because obviously it's very small scale. It's also lots of different crops at the same time.
And you've
So
taken away the carrots.
yeah, there's no carrots at all. But I mean, I suppose it's a little bit. It doesn't look like a farming that they'd be familiar with. Like, I mean, they all love it and they think it's great, but I don't think they would see themselves doing it necessarily. Like, and I suppose that's fine too. I don't think everyone should be doing what we're doing at all. But I mean, I suppose. To be honest, talking to them, I think most of them's intentions are good. You know what I mean? There's no one. I don't think they start off sort of saying, they just sort of, there's a system there which works in a certain way, and like it's very hard to kind of to up sticks and change that. Like, when you've been doing it for 20 or 30 years or more. Like, I mean, that's the main thing. Most of my neighbours they'd probably have 30 years on me, or 25 anyway. Most of them. So, like, I mean, that's the main concern, because, like, I don't know what happens. At least they're out there doing a bit, like, on their land. That, if there's nobody there, you'd be kind of more worried, because it would just be contractors or big machines coming in or something, and that might be something in the future. But yeah, like, it's been good to see. There was one of our neighbours is in the golf scheme, and he has bird cover down the back. So, like, one of the fields beside us has had a bird cover in it for the last 2 years, which has been really nice, actually, because it's been also lots of the kale's been going to seed and stuff, which would be good for bees and insects and stuff like that around us as well. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's just one of those neighbours, they're who they are. Like, I mean, one side of us, we have a neighbour who I don't really know. That would have been the guy that years ago, the farmer that lived in the house sort of died, and his land was sold. They had no kids. And it was sold to someone who lives quite far away, who I've never actually met. And he just built a big shed, and he does a lot of, he'd just be growing silage in those fields. And, like, it's kind of the side where the woodland is anyway. So we wouldn't be having many chats over the fences there. But, but like, yeah, that's a shame when that happens, because it means, like, there was a farm that could have been, I suppose, continued on. Instead, it's kind of like an absentee farmer, nearly. Like, he's not living there necessarily. He's just, using the place for.
Yeah, and that kind of ownership, it kind of changes the land system.
Yeah, I think that's yeah.
Just moving across to the chat box, Dan McCarthy asks, Fergal, how do you turn the farm manure into compost?
The magic question, Dan, and it's a very, very important one. And it's funny, I was actually talking to one of the other Farming for Nature ambassadors this week, because there's a guy called Jared Deegan up in Westmeath, and he's doing that, because, I mean, compost, you're right, the farm manure and compost are two very different things. Like, and unfortunately, we haven't really got the facility for composting, like, farm manure. We let it rot down and apply it, rot it down and rotivate it in, is what we've always done, which isn't ideal. Like, but I mean, like I said, our ground is very hungry and can digest a lot, so, like, it tends to break it down pretty fast. And and like, we tend to use it on crops like pumpkins, and which are very hungry anyway. And so. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big questions for us, the manure. And I saw that guy Jared Deegan in Westmeath has a compost turner, which would be the ideal scenario, I suppose. But, like, we don't really have the funds for things like that either. There'd be expensive machines, and so I think for the time being, we'll probably continue with the manure fork and letting it rot down. I mean, as I said, if you had a front loader, you could turn it over every now and then, get some air into it, and mix it up a bit, and try and let it rot down a bit better. But we just make do as best we can.
Just to say, Dan, and to everyone else, Jared Deegan's 5-minute videos, also, he's a Farming for Nature ambassador, so he's also up, his videos up on our YouTube channel, Farming for Nature YouTube channel. So you can see there the compost machine that Fergal's talking about, and how he turns it on a kind of a larger scale. You don't have any livestock anyway, do you, Fergal, or do you have?
No. We've got chickens there, but they're only really. I'm trying to get them into the rotation bit, because we always had them on the farm, and, like, then we had a gap, we didn't have them, and I'm trying to bring them back in. They're not in a very big scale, but I have kind of, I just wanted more. I wanted eggs again, because I was sick of buying eggs.
Yeah, and they're great to have around, especially if you have young kids.
Oh yeah.
Fergal Costello asks, well, given what you're doing, for biodiversity? Are you eligible for any eco schemes? But it seems like you've answered that. But it raises another question: why do we not have eco schemes to support you? So you might want to talk about the EIP that you guys are set up or part of at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's slightly different. I mean, there's no schemes which support the kind of farming we're doing directly, but through Tullett Bio, we are engaged in this EIP, which is a European Innovation Partnership, and basically it's a research-based project that we're doing on soil biodiversity. So it's going to try and answer questions like, I mean, what is, firstly, there's an educational component for the farmers involved. So we're all going to do a soil biology course and learn about like soil biodiversity and biology and how it works, and then begin to look at questions like what kind of amendments can we make to our crops or to our soil to increase or improve soil biology, and we're going to have that in practice. So we're going to do that with soil scientists on test plots on our farms, and going to put it all online. And so we're exploring these ideas because it really I think. And that's been very interesting because talking to farmers from lots of different sectors, not just horticulture. There's dairy, tillage, there's beef, sheep. There's all sorts of different farmers in that EIP and in that group, and we're all kind of very much on the same page in terms of realizing that it's all about the soil, and that I think certainly soil biology is something. There's always been this tendency to look at soil as very almost like an inert thing where you grow a plant and you need to add to the soil whatever the plant needs to grow. And I suppose, I mean, it's not a new thing either. I mean, organics has been talking about the importance of feeding the soil for years, but I suppose the extra step that we're looking at taking is really putting the literacy around soil biology in the hands of farmers, and really empowering farmers to say, look, you know best about how about soil. You know your land best, and I suppose to really empower farmers as well to say, like, you probably know better than your farm advisor what your farm needs. And if you approach things in that way where you kind of are willing to absorb new knowledge and adapt your practices accordingly and learn as you go, that's the real interest for me in farming as well, because I mean that whole process of failing again and failing better is what makes it interesting. And I suppose that's what we're engaged in there. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Very good. Dan McCarthy says, fair play to you. It's better than working in an office. And he's obviously very inspired.
There's some of the farm urban here. I think there is definitely ways of doing that. I mean, you would need, I think covering it is important, probably, and it's certainly turning it. You have to turn it, you have to get heat into it. I really would, if you're interested, certainly watch that Jared Egan video, because I mean, I watched it and it blew my mind, the little compost maker. Actually, I'll send you a link if I can find it online here now. Of the machines that I was looking at, and they're amazing machines that turn a compost heap. Here we go. They have these tow behind tractor powered compost. It's very interesting. Anyone who's interested in compost will look at this and go, oh, it's like I'll just send you this link. It's you put it in the tractor and it kind of tows a machine which turns a rotor backwards and flicks all the compost. So it leaves your heap, the way you have a long heap, like a windrow. You basically turn that over and adds all the heat. And that's what Jared Egan has built in Westmeath there. And I think that looks like a great way of doing it. But I mean, like I said, they're not cheap, those machines. And you need to have enough volume of manure to be making it worthwhile. And so, we'll see. I mean, I'm interested in seeing how we can begin to use wood chip. I mean, as the forest can break down wood chip, quite quickly. So I have to see if there's a way we can replicate some of the woodland processes and use those and somehow maybe use it, because there's a lot of fertility stored up in wood chip and as well, a lot of carbon mostly, but there might be ways of integrating it.
Yeah. So for any kind of conventional horticultural farmer out there, what kind of piece of advice would you give them on where to start bringing kind of more diversity onto their farm? What's a good easy win, do you think?
An easy win, I guess. I mean, those pollinator strips are great. They reduce your pest impact, especially if you're growing field scale. I think they'd be really effective, because you're breaking up the kind of monotony of crops. So it makes it less kind of, and you're probably bringing in beneficial insects. I mean, wider field margins, things like that can help as well. It's hard to know because I mean, sometimes if you're very pressed for space and you don't have the if you need every square inch of the field, but like, I mean, you probably don't need every square inch of the field, and maybe the benefits of doing something like that would pay off in the long run in terms of less disease or pest pressure. Mm-hmm. I mean, I certainly think the green manures have been great. I mean, for our soil, I think they've been really good, and they do provide that break crop in the summer season, which is probably doing a lot of good things as well. So like, yeah, definitely noticed a good return from that. Like, but it all depends on your setup, and that's why I think every farm is different, and every farm is different. And so like, really, there's no one size fits all solution, and there's no single problem. There's lots of different problems and lots of different solutions. So like, we just have to try and work out each one, at a time, I suppose.
Yeah, fair enough. Where did you get your advice and support, or can you give me a top tip where you would direct farmers to get advice and support?
I would direct farmers to other farmers. Is where I would direct them, and I think that's where we got most of our advice and support at the start, was visiting farms. We spent about 6 months visiting farms. After I left the job in Brussels, we were traveling around in a van. We visited lots of farms around Europe, and I saw a lot of different things. And like, didn't do all of them, but did some of them. And I would do the same. I think here it's the best way, because you're going to do things your own way. But the more things you see, the more kind of ideas they give you for how you might want to do them. And so, and also in terms of advice, or in terms of like, when to sow stuff, especially for Ireland, it's always good to talk to people who are doing it already, because they'll give you a better idea of what's doable and what's not doable, or what's worked and hasn't worked.
Coma Kelly says here, have you had many problems with pests, and have you found that an ecologically minded approach, sorry, my computer froze, ecologically minded approach to your farming has reduced that burden?
Yeah, I mean, we actually had most problems, I suppose, about 2 years in, because the first year was probably okay because we weren't growing an awful lot, but 2 or 3 years in, and we probably hadn't added enough fertility. And I mean, I know this answer is probably as old as the hills, but like, I mean, healthy soil, healthy plant, less pests, that's just 100% true. So like, I mean, if your soil is healthy and is the plant is fairly well fed. And I would say not too well fed, because too well fed is a problem as well. But there's somewhere in between. There's a happy medium where the plants are fairly hardy and it's not a major issue. I mean, we have had trouble with pests. We use slug pellets, organic slug pellets, when we transplant, just because we don't want to lose a full bed of brassicas just after putting them down. That's the real one. We cover a lot of brassicas and things like that, mostly to stop carrot root fly. Sorry, not carrot root fly. The carrot root fly is why we stopped growing carrots. So the answer to that is yes. Carrots, we stopped growing carrots because of carrot root fly, basically. But no, cabbage root fly, which was a problem for us, and that's why we cover them after transplanting. And then, like, I mean, yeah, you've got your butterflies and stuff like that. But I mean, a funny story about that. I remember one time we had all these covers on our brassicas. In the late season, we were worried about the cabbage butterfly, the white butterfly, and the caterpillars. And I noticed, like, I saw these wee birds that were trapped under the cover, and I was going, "There's birds trapped." And every day or two, I was lifting up the cover and letting the bird out. And then I said, "Hang on a minute, these birds are going in here to eat the caterpillars." And I actually took the covers off, and I swear, like, the next day I went down, and there were about 10 wee birds. I think they were chaffinches, actually, female chaffinches, that were eating the caterpillars off the whole line of brassicas. And it made me, I mean, that was I opened my eyes and said, "My God, if you get the birds on your side, you would be totally sorted." You know what I mean? And it might not work every year. I mean, I think it was just where we had them that year. There was a line of trees kind of nearby, but they would lift off when you went nearby. And yeah, I mean, there's one ecological solution, but it's yeah, definitely the key thing is the soil. And like, our first tunnel, we've had trouble in one of the tunnels with pests. And that's partly because we grow a lot of other stuff. We have a lot of perennials in our tunnels. Mm-hmm. We have like a couple of 2 peach trees, a couple of grapevines. We've got like things like that inside the tunnels. And that's great when you get peaches, but it's not so great when you have, like, they're a bit of a habitat for things like red mite, spider mites and thrips and things like that, which are very persistent pests and hard to get rid of, and kind of overwinter on perennial, crops like that, trees and things. So if you had you need to be very kind of careful with, cleaning the place out, and I suppose the less of those you have in there, the less pressure you have. But again, the other issue we have in the tunnel is extremely dry because our soil is so light, and getting enough moisture into the tunnels is always a big challenge for us. So that's the one thing that we're still working on, is a solution for that, and maybe some sort of a mulch to stop the evaporation is a solution. But it's not so much a problem for tomatoes, but a bigger problem for some of any of the greeny stuff that you might want to grow in the spring somewhere, is struggles with the dry weather.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. So Fergal, kind of coming towards the end now, and unless anyone has any further questions, but what kind, you were kind of saying that you receive very little support, financial, zero support financially, but what kind of support in general do you think you could use to farm in a way that you would feel would most benefit nature?
Well, it wouldn't change the way I farm, you see, is the problem. I think they've got to support people who are doing good things, as opposed to, I think there's a great effort to incentivize people who might not be doing things well to do them better. And there's not an awful lot of incentive for people who are already doing them well, if you get what I mean, and trying to do them well. And we're not looking for, a fortune, but if we had some sort of income support, it would take an awful lot of pressure off, in terms of I don't know a single horticulturist in the country who's not working really hard. And it doesn't mean they're not running profitable businesses. Maybe that's just the nature of the business, but you've still got to ask the question. I mean, this is a bigger question for our society, is what we want from a livelihood and what we want. And we just want to make a fair living for the work that we do. So we're not asking to earn a fortune. We're not, but nor do I think we should have to slave away to earn, minimum wage. I could slave away to earn 60 grand a year or something like that, you know what I mean? But if I'm talking about, you're talking about working really hard to earn the minimum. So I think it's important that there's a set of supports out there for people who are supplying local markets, and I think it's beneficial to communities to have that there. It'll be beneficial to people who find I suppose a livelihood that might suit them. And I think some people end up not doing things that maybe they don't want to do because they're afraid, or the enabling environment isn't there for them to start doing something like this. And we should all be able to do, have access to land and be able to do it if we need to.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah, that's good. Good point.
2 questions there. When do we start with seeds? Certain season, and what crops to start with? The main, I suppose, we sort of, February is normally when we start putting tomatoes down. February. We have stuff in the tunnels that we're overwintering that we would put down last September. I suppose we stopped sowing seeds between November and February. Probably, I don't really sow much in there. I know people that do, but we don't really do much in that gap. We kind of depend on the tunnels to cover us from, say, they'll get a burst of growth on in February, March, April. And then we've got some crops outside, like purple sprout and broccoli, and we've got some cauliflowers that come in the spring, and then some stored vegetables and stuff like that, like beetroot and onions and things like that we kind of depend on to cover that wee gap. But it is a bit of a lean moment. And the gutter along the sides of the tunnels, it's funny, I actually did that on my 3rd tunnel, but I made a bit of a hames of it. Now it drains into a pond. Now, water is vital, and we have rainwater collection on 2 of our sheds, which we use to irrigate the tunnels. But we also have a stream that runs along the land, so we have no shortage of water. We can pump water straight from the stream, and there's a well as well. We can pump water out of the well, but it's just incredibly hard, that water. So we can't use it through the irrigation system. So our main issue is that we only want to put rainwater through the irrigation system, otherwise it clogs up the irrigation pipes, and that's just, you'll be replacing the pipes every couple of years, which is not something I like doing. So yeah, but it's we still haven't resolved that completely, because the capacity we have is only about 5,000 liters, and that sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot. You'd put that through the tunnels in a week, if you had in hot weather. So the way we're getting the springs the last while, with the really long dry springs, has been particularly difficult, because it's the last time of year you want that. I mean, I've been watering outside actually on occasion in Ireland, which just seems outrageous, but I mean, maybe that's what we're looking at. May and June. Yeah, it's been very, very dry the last few years, and we might have to do things slightly differently. But again, we just have to. I mean, if you can get the transplants in, the soil is holding water well at the same time, down below. So it's not like I think our soil has good enough water retention capacity. It's just, you just got to get the stuff started, like, and then it'll hold. It might not grow as fast as you'd like, but it'll survive.
As a question or two has come in about, when do you start sowing seeds and what crops do you start with? I think it kind of strikes me that if anyone's interested in horticultural courses or like wanting to learn more, I don't know if you run anything, Fergal, but I know one of our other ambassadors, Jim Cronin, runs a horticultural course down in County Clare, and there's one down in Kinsale in County Cork. Is there any more that you know of, Fergal, that you would recommend?
No, those would be the two main ones I'd know of. I mean, we're talking about taking interns next year, so if people are interested, we would be open to that. And maybe we might put that out on through your network, the Farm to Nature, because what we're talking about doing is we've been living in that mobile home I mentioned at the start for 10 years, so we're going to move out of that and into our house, but we'll have a mobile home there, and we're hoping to be able to use that as a kind of a place that people can come and stay and work in the farm and learn. And I mean, I'd like to have so that's one thing we're considering, is to do that. But apart from that, I mean, I think like I said, if you can go and work on a few farms and see them and put a bit of work in and get a picture of the different things that are out there. If you're looking to start off, that's invaluable. I mean, I didn't do horticulture course. It would probably have benefited us because it would have made us a bit more, how do you say, efficient maybe from the get-go. But you also work out your own way of doing things, and like I suppose the key is to know things like spacings and timings and your transplants, and I mean, it would be useful to do a course around that for sure. And
I know the one that Jim runs, for instance, is very part-time. I think it's like every second Wednesday, like February, so you follow the season as
Jim is very good. I mean, Jim is, I think, like I was tempted to do that course myself, because I think I probably would benefit from it actually.
I actually know some people that have gone back, who are horticulturists and have gone back and said, for the economics of it, it's actually really benefited them.
That's where he's got that down, and like he knows, how you can turn money off a bed, which is vital. But I mean, at the same time, like I said, you got to go in for.
You got to just do it yourself.
Yeah, you can't, like, I mean, so like there's pros and cons of all those things. And like when we started, we grew all sorts of stuff. We wanted to grow everything, like, and it was very interesting. Like it was fascinating to try and grow things and see what they work. And you don't want to turn the whole thing into just an exercise of flipping beds for making money. You want to leave a lot of love in there too. You know what I mean? If, like I say, if you're not enjoying it, if you're just doing it for the cash, it might become a bit too stale too. So like there's a balance to be struck there, like all things.
Okay, so just finishing up there, Fergal, how hopeful are you for the future of, I suppose, Irish farming in general, but your own farm in particular?
I'm very hopeful, actually. I'm quite optimistic. I try and keep the good side out anyway. But I think for our own farm, I'm optimistic. There's lots of things I'd like to do. I mean, I could spend 100,000 euros on our farm tomorrow, but we don't have it to spend. I'd love to like develop lots of things, and like we've got an old ruin there. I'd love to do that up. We've got like the woodland to be thinned out. As I said earlier, I'd really love to build the synergy between the woodland and the other two fields, and have the whole place humming in some sort of synchrony or harmony. For farming in Ireland in general, I'm also optimistic, actually. And I think that there's a bit of an awakening happening amongst farmers. There's a lot of young people who are aware of the issues, and I think it's a lot harder to hide the impacts of the farming systems that we have than it was. And I think people are aware that something has got to give, and like something is going to give, and there's a reckoning coming for that industrial model of production, and like it's not going to go down without a fight. But I think we've got to kind of constantly demonstrate the good things that we can do. And as I said, I mentioned earlier that like the ecological literacy, or whatever you want to call it, like when you look at the land differently, and it pains me to drive around the country, when you look through fields and you go, Jesus, this imagine what this could look like if we had the kind of like agroecological land use approaches, and we had diversified farming systems, and we had a real kind of like get more people back on the land. If we get more people doing stuff, working, and sort of wake more farmers up to the potential of working with nature rather than fighting it the whole time. That's that's what I hope can happen. Like, and I think there's lots of positive signs that we can progress in that direction for sure.
Well, do you know, you started by, oh, sorry, there's one more question here. Any thoughts on agroforestry?
Yep, very interested in agroforestry and silvopasture. I actually think silvopasture, I was at the Biofarm conference in Carrigashannon a couple of weeks ago. Silvopasture is when you have like mature trees and grassland underneath. And that really, that is ideal for Ireland. And basically, especially given the way the climate has gone the last while, the longest running silvopasture, project in Europe has been in County Armagh. And it's been running for the last 20 years or 25 years. And they've grown silvopasture systems, and they're just constantly demonstrating, you know, their tolerance of drought, their tolerance of flooding, you know, and like the animals are happier, healthier. There's no real loss in yields, or, you know, so like it's a no-brainer. I mean, I think a mixed system where we have much more woodland is absolutely vital in Ireland. And like, I mean, that's when I pass those fields and I see empty fields and rushes and bogs, I say we've got to get trees in more places. Animals love trees. Do you know what I mean? You know,
It's great shelter, but great shade as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
no, definitely. Fergal, thanks very much. Amazing contribution. It's lovely to hear your story, and thanks for your generosity in sharing it and answering questions and being fired at you left, right, and centre. So,
no problem.
Thanks for that. If people want to contact you directly, or, you know, is it through Talamh Bio or social media?
They can contact me directly. I can put my email there if you want to. No problem.
Well, I think your farm, it's called Leaf and Root Farm.
Yes.
So I think people can just Google
website.
that. And,
exactly. Yeah.
And there's a contact page on that, I believe, isn't there?
There is. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone hasn't seen the short film about Fergal's farm, it's on our YouTube channel. So it's up there, and it's just 5 minutes long, and it's really nice, like, visual as to what's going on in Fergal's farm and how him and Emmanuel are managing it. If anyone would like to share this Q&A session, hopefully it'll be up again on YouTube in the next day or two, so feel free to share it. And I'll put a message up on social media when that's up there. Hopefully I haven't asked Fergal yet, but hopefully we'll be having a farm walk on his land in 2022. So, you know, do sign up to our newsletter on our homepage to get more information on that, on any of our farm walks that will be coming up in spring, summer next year. We also have an online forum for any questions, farmer to farmer, that you want answered by fellow farmers. And so we're finished up for this year, but we'll be back again mid-January with Louis Macaulay from County Meath, talking about tillage. So until then, thanks again, Fergal, for joining us, and thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Have a good Christmas. See you, folks. Bye-bye.
Happy Christmas. Bye-bye.